Good morning, and I'm Filiz Sonmez, and today we are here to interview Mr. Rick and Chris Rados, correct? And today is July 16, 2022, and we are here with Mr. Rick Rados, and we would like to start off by thanking you for your time today. And we will first question. Could start by hearing about where you grew up and about your parents, your background information a little bit, please.
My father was an illegal immigrant from Croatia during World War I. He grew up in Dubrovnik, was born there. I grew up in a fishing village, working the boats. You go to school for 3 years. And then you go to work to help feed the family. And by the time you're a teenager, you've gone to the bigger fishing boats, not the local ones, up to the Grand Banks. And by 13 or 14, you're working merchant ships and sailing around the world. His second trip to New York City. And meanwhile, World War I was beginning. And he said, Europe is a mess and New York City is the future. So he jumped ship and promptly realized that there was nothing for him to do. And the way to citizenship was join the military. So in those days, if you joined and served for the duration, if you came back out alive, you were a citizen. So he joined the Marines and survived the war and went on. When he was a sailor. He grew up on boats and small ships. And if you're a Marine in the Navy, a seagoing Marine, you're a policeman, and the sailors and the Navy people don't like each other. The sailors are scrubbing decks and handling large guns, and the Marines are standing around with a holster on their hip. And he wanted to get back to boats, so he joined the Coast Guard and stayed there and raised a family. And I'm the last of his 3 children to arrive. So I grew up, he would have a different ship every 3 years. And I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, moved to Boston, moved to Brooklyn. Pearl Harbor was bombed, and we didn't see my father for 4 or 5 years. We did World War II in Brooklyn. When he got back, we moved to another ship in Mobile, Alabama. We did a tour down there, and my mother died down there. He was still out to sea. My brother and sister are older, so I was shipped back with some relatives back to Manhattan, to Brooklyn, to live with them until they could find me a boarding school. So I went to almost as many schools as there were grades and bounced all over the Great Lakes, Eastern Seaboard, and Gulf States, and spent most of my summers on my father's ships. Anyhow, he retired. He got transferred back to New York, and I got to get out of boarding school. So he and I lived like bachelors in Staten Island for a few years, and then he retired. So he probably had 36 or 38 years in the service, because he joined when he was like 17. And moved me to St. Petersburg in the middle of the school year, my sophomore year in high school. And by then I was a football player. I was always drawing and painting. It was my hobby. It still is, as you can see. And that kind of drawing up there, that's Harry Merritt's house that he designed. Which one?
Haber.
Haber, yeah. Anyhow, when I got out of high school down here, I had a few football scholarships and an art scholarship to Pratt in New York. My high school art teacher was a retired commercial artist, and he knew the Pratt people and talked to them. But that was just a tuition scholarship. Football, as you know, is room, board, books, tuition, and I figured I I could make art anywhere, but I couldn't play football at Pratt. So I wound up, I signed up with Western Kentucky, and later in the year, University of Tampa came over and wanted a teammate of mine and myself, and he didn't have a scholarship, so he wasn't going to go to play college. Well, anyhow, the two of us went over there, tried out. They offered us both scholarships, and they told me I wasn't a quarterback, which I wasn't, that I was going to come. When I came to St. Petersburg, football wasn't as developed as it was in New York City. And so they made me a quarterback. I was a running back, just because I had a lot of experience and a little more field time than most of the other people we had. So they wanted me back at running back, and I said, yes. So I spent 3 years playing football at the University of Tampa. During that time, and as an aside, through high school, when I was working, I always had construction jobs, and I enjoyed it, getting out and banging, sawing lumber and framing up a house. My father's hobby was woodworking, so I always lived in a home that had a garage or a basement that was full of tools, woodworking tools, metal tools, and a bunch of materials. So I grew up with him making things and working construction and drawing and painting my little pictures. And then one day I woke up and said, there's no future for me in football. And I had discovered architecture. I said, wow, it's making things, it's art, it's all together. So in the middle of my junior season, I bailed out, quit, and went up to Gainesville to study architecture. And went to work for Harry.
This is
out of school.
For the record, this is Clarissa Carr asking the questions. What year was that? Just so we can kind of have a timeline.
I graduated.
To Gainesville.
My freshman year at the University of Tampa was in '56. Okay. I had just turned 18, and so 56, 7, and 8. So in '59, in the fall of '59, I went up to Gainesville. Okay. And graduated, and I about had to start over because I was taking a couple of art courses in 12 hours, and I wasn't going to graduate if I stayed there 6 years because I wasn't there to go to school. I was there to play football. Anyhow, I about started over. I went to Gainesville because I had no serious math, no physics, no science, and they didn't accept my physical education. because it was granted to us as football players.
I see.
As we just got 3 hours credits in PE, and Gainesville said no, so they made me go out and play golf with a bunch of children for a semester.
And what sort of reputation did Gainesville, University of Florida, have for architecture that drew you to go there?
When I went there, I had no clue.
Okay.
It was Gainesville or Miami, and Miami was a private school and much pricier, and Gainesville was affordable. Now all of a sudden my father wasn't enjoying his son getting an education free. He was paying for it for a while. So anyhow, I went up there, and it wasn't so good. There was a handful of people in the time that I were there, Merritt, Wollendorf, Tucker, are three names that were, and I had Merritt and Wollendorf once a semester, and I never had Tucker, Bob Tucker, and they were really good. They were inspirational in their knowledge and the willingness to give time for themselves. I never had Bob Tucker for a professor or studio leader, and he created almost every project I ever did up there. I got to know him, and I would go by his office, I'd go by his house. He would stop by my house sometimes on the way home, and he would give me a crit of my work on a kitchen table. And Tucker and I worked together one summer for Dean Wollendorf, and the next summer, Tucker and I, the professor, worked for Harry Merritt. And that was the summer before I graduated. And when I came out, yeah, it was just that time. Then Tucker left, and Wollendorf, I was probably asked to leave. He was a little radical. Are you familiar with Bruce Goff? Okay, he came from the Bruce Goff School. So he was not in tune with everybody that was there. But I've seen him take average students and get them excited and get them believing that they could do stuff. It wasn't just follow the rules and make something. There's spiritual things, there's aesthetic things, there's energy, and there's social things that don't necessarily show up. It was a whole different side. He was a good experience for everybody that he had, and that's the story. Well, then I had told Harry I'm leaving, and you need to find another guy to be your office, because I'm going to start looking around after about a year. So I already told him that. He knew I was leaving. And a Tampa firm who had a nice size firm down here and wanted to upgrade their design staff came up to Gainesville and asked around who's the recent graduates, and they heard about me and came down the street. And this guy walked in. It was McLean, Ragnone, McIntosh, and Bernardo. And McLean walked into Harry's office and said, I'd like to speak to Rick. I want to hire him. Harry said, go ahead, he's leaving anyhow.
And this was after completing your bachelor's degree? As you were graduating with your bachelor's in architecture? Okay.
Yeah, well, after my bachelor's, I stayed in Gainesville and worked for Harry for about a year. And it was at that time that the Tampa firm found me and made me a deal I couldn't refuse. So, and it was about money, but it was also about design freedom. That if you make me the designer, you don't get to tell me what to do. Otherwise, I'll hand the pencils back to you and say, I'll be your draftsman. No half and half. And if the client's not happy, then I'm in trouble. They should be telling me no, but I don't want all these partners and other people saying, no, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. And if you can live with that, I'd be really happy. And they did. For the most part. So I became a partner there, stayed about 7 or 8 years, and then it got to be time where I got to do something, and I'm getting back into the rut. So I left, and I was about 35 then, and opened my own one-man office. I had about enough money saved up to open a modest little office to feed my family for about a year. And if I wasn't making any money at the end of the year, I was going to be out looking for a job again. But it worked out. I managed to collect enough work to hire some people and get an office established. And that grew into the Rados partnership. I was Rick Rados architect, but I actually had partners as I grew. And in 1980, and one of them was her husband, Jim McLean. And I was back to the same place. We were like, and I'm not a businessman. I didn't have any grand plans. Success can be as dangerous as failure. When we grew, got work, everybody was happy, and everybody that wound up sticking with us was like me. They all wanted to be design work. Nobody wanted to do the books, the personnel stuff, the marketing, all the other things that it takes to run a business. And we were 15 or 16 people, and there was no way out because I never got to work on my projects. I got to work on the office. And so short of just shrinking back and leaving a whole bunch of people, partners, on their own, I said, it's time, we're going to merge us. We're going to merge with somebody else with a bigger outfit or same size outfit. And they can run the business and I'll just go be a design director or a designer. And we did that. And I went back. The firm that brought me here, they lost Frank, and at any rate, in the time that I went with them, it wound up being Rignon, McIntosh, Bernardo, and Rados. That was the last R. And then Rick Rados. And in 11 years later, 10 years later, they were looking to go through some life changes, and I was ready, so we went back and merged together. So we had the biggest office in Tampa, about 40 people or so. And I didn't have to be the leader. I was the design director for a year and a half or two. And then we lost our president and other things went awry, and Rick was the new president, CEO of the firm. And I said, okay, if I can spend half my time on my projects, I'm going to assign a lot of duties. You guys are going to pick it up, blah, blah, blah. They didn't. So I packed up and left that. And that's when I went off to Gainesville to teach for a few years. And part of it was the negotiation was, I don't care what title I have. The money's okay, but I need to have access to to the faculty computer program. Mm-hmm. So I was using computers, and in that time, computers were in the office as electronic drawing boards, two-dimensional things. You drew with them, not model. And there was a new program, Architrion, that modeled things. This was the mid-late 80s, 87, 88. And it only ran on Macintosh, on Apples. So I needed to buy a new big Apple computer and scanners and printers. And so I also used that time to become computer literate and learn how to work in the computer instead of Beaumont Sketchpad and drawing board. And the first time I knew I did it was, you're working on something, you have an idea, or you see a little picture of it, you grab a piece of Sketchpad or paper, and you do a little diagram to help you freeze it up and memorize it so you can come back to it later. Mm-hmm. And one day I was working on something, and I had a thought like that, and I turned to the computer, and I made a little model of it. Now I didn't have to think about how to do it, like you had to learn how to draw. And you don't think about drawing when you're drawing something. And I finally got the computer, turned it into my pencil, mm-hmm. where I could use it without thinking about it. And I was hooked. And I said, yeah, that's it.
Definitely, it seems at the forefront of computers and architecture. It was nice being able to come to UF and have access to that technology.
When I was up there in the late 80s, teaching, I think I did 2 semesters, and the drive was killing me. Mm-hmm. Up and back, and I tried going up on doing a Monday studio and just sleeping over and doing a Wednesday studio and then coming home. And they said I could change it to 2 studios a week and lengthen the time, which UF is doing now, but there's too much time in between. For a student that's on a wrong path and wasting his time, you don't want to see it 3 days later. You'd like to see it now so you can nudge them around and ask some questions, and so the hole isn't as deep to dig out of to move on. Anyhow, when I was there at that time, there were computer labs, and everybody went to a lab because students didn't have computers. You had to learn in a laboratory. Now students have computers in kindergarten, or in their pocket. I mean, that's all the iPhone is a little computer. So you don't have to teach computers anymore, but you do have to teach something about the modeling and the much, much more sophisticated stuff, and like how to do 3D printing and all that, which I don't know. My computer technology is decades old.
As a professor coming up to UF, and also as a professional architect, did you find yourself influenced or impacted by any of your professors while you were a student, Harry, and how did you see that impact in your teaching style?
What Merritt is. Harry Merritt, Dean Bryant Vollendorf, and Robert Tucker were three professors that were there. That actually, they were the guys that taught me what architecture was and how to think about it. Mm-hmm. That's the nifty thing about architecture is if you go to university and you study the flute, you come out and you know the flute. Architecture is taught by the project. So you're taught how to approach it, how to think about it, how to solve it. Lawyers do the same thing, only they work by the case. And that's why those two kinds of students wind up doing other things, because you're really taught how to problem solve, how to look at investigate existing conditions and be able to express what a problem is, form concepts and ideas about it, goals, find solutions, and how do you implement it, and do that in architectural terms or in legal terms. And that's what they did. And Tucker was especially good because he was, is it didactic? With teaching by asking questions. Mm-hmm. He hardly ever made a pronouncement. He would ask you to think about something this way, and send you away scratching your head. Yeah, so those are the three people that influenced me.
What about European architects?
Harry was a little more formulaic. He had a lot of rules. And in fact, he came in to our studio as a visiting. We had several people do that. They don't do that anymore. Merritt showed up and gave us a 1-week project. They gave him a studio, and you had a new fresh face in there, and it was like, wow. And when he left, it was like the students named him God Merritt, because he spoke down from above in absolutes about the way things are and should be. And a little bit about how come, but, and whereas Dean was much more loosey-goosey, how does it feel kind of thing. But Merritt, I think Merritt got his master's at Harvard, and that was the gropiest days, I guess. And it was a lot more solid. Mm-hmm. You could latch on to Harry's stuff and do something okay. But not much outside of that. If you went somewhere else. I've got some of my student work that I remember some of Harry's crits.
What were some of his critiques?
Order was very important. And having everything equal, sort of, which was stifling. We had a student housing project in Gainesville, and I think Merritt was my design studio professor then. At any rate, some of it was standard dormitory type for single students, and then there was some married student housing. So married students have children, and life's different. And I was recently married, by that time. And one of my early concepts was I was going to keep the Merritt housing in 2-3-story garden style, little courtyards that hooked in around a center thing, and a big ring up in the air of the single students' dormitories. They are different. They could come together. The little courtyards could be more like play yards, whereas on Friday night the students, the single students want to be out, and so do the married ones want to be out drinking beer in the major courtyard or whatever. But there was nooks and crannies and different, and Harry was just against it. No, you can't do that. Well, these people get this and those people get that. I said, well, they're different. And besides, if it's all the same, what you're going to get is one big block, which is what I wound up with, one big square donut of vroom, 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 that there was a nominal difference in the form. So we were different in those kind of ways. And but at the same time, he could give you a really good structure upon which to depart from. And when you got off and were falling off the cliff, you could climb back on Harry's shelf and be safe.
And you were there right as Harry was being brought in by Turpin Bannister to teach. So he was just starting off on his teaching career. Did you, with Harry and D.B. Vollendorf and Bob Tucker, did you feel like they just naturally fit into being professors and teaching? What was the kind of student life experience there?
I think Tucker was probably more teacher than practitioner. It was more natural for him. He did a little practice on the side. He later left and went. In fact, Tucker, after I was down here in Tampa, called up. He moved to Detroit. I got a job with the University of Detroit in their architecture program, and was a big designer for Smith Henchman and Grills, a giant firm. I think now they're the Smith Group or something like that. And they were as big or bigger than Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, but they didn't have the design quality or the reputation, and they wanted it. So they were going to go on a big hunt to find designers. And Tucker told him about me and called me up and said, send your portfolio up here. I want to show it to these guys. And so my portfolio went up there, and I was happy. I wasn't unhappy with where I was at. And they said, well, come on up for a weekend. We'll fly you up here, show you our office, blah, 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 and get to know each other a little better. And the resources in that large firm were, anyhow, Tucker arranged that, and I got to see Detroit right after the riots. And I had a black cab driver pick me up, and he says, you want to go right to your location, or do you want to take the scenic route? So he said, give me the scenic route. So he took me through all the burned out places. That it was like, this was not a Chamber of Commerce move to make, to entice me to move to Detroit. But they had like 4 floors of a giant office building. A floor of interior designers, and another floor that was shared by planners and landscape architects, and all departmentalized. And your project just went from department to department, and that's the way they were organized at that time. However, you could sit at a desk, pick up the phone, and they had half a floor. This is a library. It was librarians, and say, I need to know something about this kind of stone or what have you, and then get an interior designer to tell you, I'm thinking about this fabric or that. Can you get any samples of that? People just show up at your desk. I got a traffic problem with the way I'm coming in and out. You got a traffic engineer down there, whoop, in your planning department? The resources were incredible. They had a basement that was 3 times the size of this house that made models, and a rendering department. So you didn't have to learn how to draw, was truly executive, and it was it was enticing to say, wow, if I want any of those things, I have to do it in my little office, or I go to the library. We couldn't Google it or have computers in those days. But it was also so rigid. And so you could get fired for taking work home to work on it on the weekend. You're not allowed to take any of our work out of the office, this, that, the other thing. And it was like, I came back, obviously I didn't go there, told them all thank you, give me my return ticket. And I enjoyed the freedom to approach making architecture the way I saw it, rather than the infrastructure that they had developed for this giant company. How do we handle 800 people? Yeah, they'd fire people for coming in a half an hour late. It didn't matter what you did, but you had to be back from your desk at work at 1 o'clock from lunch, and that doesn't foster a creative environment.
Can you speak some about your personal design philosophy and design approach? Talking about the creativity.
I know a lot of quotes, but I can never remember who said it. And after a while, I'm sure I paraphrase it. But there's somebody once said, if you ask a painter, asking a painter to talk about art is like asking a plant to discuss horticulture. The painter makes art. He doesn't talk about it. And the reason you have painting and architecture is because things can be said that aren't verbal. But I'm process-oriented. Just take this house as an example. It's like, we got a site and a place, a climate, a location. Those are all givens. I had a client too. I wanted to do 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, and she said, "What if you have a guest?" Because she knew the second bedroom was going to be a studio. So we had 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, this program. Anyhow, given that, it's mostly all the external factors that come in it. The floodplain, the air, the winds. This is all designed for 150 mile an hour wind. And did use a structural engineer. Being up in the air, it's more like an airplane wing. It wants to fly away, more so than a house that sits on the ground. So it's got to be anchored. Function, space, form, material, structure, proportion, order is what I teach. That's what architecture is. Name anything else, and it falls in one of those 7 buckets. And each bucket is, and how do you know space is good or not? It's judged by all the other 6. How it functions, how the form that it makes, how this and that, the materials that are used, et cetera, et cetera. And within that, there's the context of obviously time, material, but more importantly, climate and physical location and the place you're in. And as you can see, I honor context in form of climate in form of environment, not so much the built context, by mimicry. It doesn't bother me that this house doesn't look like all the other houses on this street. In fact, it probably would bother me if it did. So it does in context, size and setback and what have you, just not in anything else. It is a team sport if you're doing anything bigger than houses. And how you work together and how you organize is very important. We unfortunately teach our students, they all think they're going to be one-person shows, and they're going to do everything. Well, then you're just going to do little tiny buildings. If you're going to design a high school, almost every room and department is 300,000 square feet, and you're going to do that in a year and see it built in 2 years after that. It's a lot of people got to work on that. So not only having, as a designer, a design vision, you have to be able to explain it to the people helping you design so that they can contribute, not just tell them what to do. There's too much to do to tell everybody. You have to have, here's the framework. You take this as a subset of the problem, and within some framework that I've given you, work on that, you're working on this, etc. But you've got just designers, you've got people doing all the contract documents, and as the designer starts with all the engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers, kitchen consultants, acousticians, blah, blah, blah. You're also bringing them along and addressing their problems, and then it moves into contract documents. There's a whole set of finer issues where the design can get lost. And those people have to be design sensitive and have an understanding of what we're trying to put together, because they can't ask you, keep coming back every 2 minutes about every decision they have to make. So they need an umbrella of an idea to work within. Meanwhile, you've got budgets and people worried about the cost from the very first day, and schedules, and owners are saying, I've got children who need to be in this school in September of next year. And then you go out to the marketplace and you're bidding it, and you got all these contractors going. Same thing in construction. More stuff comes up. This didn't get built right. How do we change it? It can get butchered out there. It's so many ways to lose it. But if you see something through to the end, it's wholesome, rich, natural thing, it wasn't the one person's product. It started with one person. But it was the product of a whole lot of people that saw it home over a period of years before. And that's the crummy thing about being an architect. You don't get to see your mistakes until about 2 or 3 years later. You thought that was going to be a lovely detail or a sweet proportion in there. And it looked good in the computer. When I got there, I didn't like it, and the light hit it wrong, and oh my goodness. But I don't want to do that again. But meanwhile, I've done it 3 more times on other projects. So feedback, that's why it takes a long time to get better. The feedback is long term.
What about Merritt's archive? You mentioned about you work with him, and then you have some design not published.
Me? Him.
And with you, do you work together in a project?
No, I worked for him. We didn't work together. I worked for him. I did what I was told.
But you designed together sometimes?
No.
But
no, Harry designed his work, and I was his support team.
What about any project not published you have in your computer archives, your archives about?
I don't know if these things have been. I've thought about that. What happened to all Harry's drawings? Who's got them? Did he give them to the university? Are they archived?
Many are in the Smathers archives at the University of Florida.
They are?
Before he passed away, and also Tim helped, his son helped give along the collection.
Okay.
But Harry was not, record keeping was not his strong point.
Are you kidding me?
No.
His filing cabinet was his station wagon. Yeah. He would open mail while he's driving and throw it in the back seat.
I can only imagine.
If you wanted to go someplace with him, you had to shuffle things off the floor to find a place to sit.
So, right. So we have bits and pieces of various projects. So I have seen this drawing of the Haber residence. So
Okay.
Did you say that you drew his projects? or was this a draft by him or by you?
The drawing is by me.
By you. Okay, yeah.
The design is by him.
Right.
Yes.
But that's important for us to know too.
Yeah,
And
Did
this is, I just had my eyeball fell out a month or so ago. I lost a lens, cataract. So I have artificial lenses, and one of them was about 15 years old, fell in my eye. It dropped out, so I was like a one-eyed pirate when we were moving in here. I've since had it replaced, dug out, and a new one put
you're
in.
on the water, so an eye patch wouldn't be.
That's what we were telling Harry. Dan Powers and I were on the phone with him after he had his lower leg removed.
Right.
And it was like, okay, Harry, what you need to do is if you'll get yourself a wooden, don't get one of those titanium legs. I lived on boats, and his email address was pelagic something or other. I said, Harry, you need to get yourself a wooden peg leg and an eye patch, and we'll get a parrot for you right on your shoulder. Anyhow, my eyesight is returning, but it's not quite back to normal yet, so I'm squinting at this stuff. Behringer.
It's really exciting to know that you drew these because
yes.
for me, I know Harry later in life published his book on perspective drawing.
I got one.
So I have one too. Yeah.
It's over there somewhere.
So was that something that he taught you how to do perspective, or did you come to UF kind of already having that skill?
No, I already knew how to draw.
Yeah,
I had an art background before I ever knew about architecture. So,
Right.
in fact, when I was part of my learning about architecture was I was doing renderings of builders' houses to make money on the side when I wasn't playing football. I was going to UT. And then all of a sudden, it was ugly houses. That's when I started putting the art and the architecture together and finding out more about architecture. So I knew how to draw.
Right. How would this work when you would draw these perspectives for him? Would he already have drawn the plan? Or would he
Yeah,
do the
he
interviews
had
with the
plans,
clients with you?
elevations, sections. He did, the design was pretty much finished. And he'd say, do me an overall view and do me this, and I would make a few little thumbnails and say, here's a view and a view, or let's go up here and look over the stair into in that same Behringer house, an interior view. He used to rag me about, he said, Rados, you got to quit drawing yourself in all my work. There's always some guy with glasses on in there.
And that's you? All right, now I know.
No, it never occurred to me that it was me, but Harry thought it was.
I'll get it. So it must have been the Haynes house, which was on Noonan's Lake. What years did you work for Harry?
60, January of 63, I went to work for him full time. The summer before that, I worked for him also.
Okay.
So I was there for almost all of 63 and the summer of 62.
Okay. Did you work on the Lakeshore Towers?
Yes.
Okay.
And so did Tucker
Okay.
and Bob Troy. Have you run across his name?
I haven't yet. Bob Troy? Troy?
Robert Troy. Troy and I were classmates. And when I went to work for Harry, Troy got a job down in his home turf of Fort Pierce, I think. And Harry got Bob to come take my chair when I was leaving. And I still know him, see him, and we still hang out together. And Troy had a really nice hand. He could draw beautifully, and this was pre-computer days. Now the method that I'm using, that's the method that pen and ink work, no color. That's what he brought from Harvard with him and said that's the way you're going to draw them.
That's how he went.
And I had drawn like that some, but I would normally have put some colored pencil or some watercolor on it or something. And he was like, no, not that. Let's see what the other ones are. Okay, yeah. When this house was built. Now, that's not me at the front door. That guy's chubby.
When looking at these drawings, what sort of elements would you say were maybe distinct of Harry's teachings or approach?
I had Jason Allred? Mm-hmm. Jason and his family were here last week with us.
Get out.
Yeah,
His office is right next to mine.
Took the boys out for a boat ride. He came back and said, Rados, I hate you, and now I'm going to have to buy a boat. Anyhow, Jason and I were talking about, well, I got to be careful. We're talking about teaching styles of professors that we know. Mm-hmm. And I inquired about how one of them was with students, and because I thought he was rather harsh. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can be so direct and hard that you turn people off. Architecture students have to get used to accepting criticism. And half of what your job is to teach them, to help them absorb what fits and what doesn't. 80% of what I heard, I threw away. But boy, that other 20% is what I grew on. And you got to do the same thing. So every time somebody says something about your work, don't take it personally. Say, yeah, okay, and try not to laugh, or say, oh, yeah, maybe you ought to think about that. But anyhow, where was I? Merritt's teaching style. He was really good for the good students and the talented people, lavished a lot of time on them. And if you weren't one of the good ones, you didn't come out much better than you went in. The good ones came out made their semester with him was a lot of improvement. So there's an awful lot, and I don't know, and Jason and I were talking about the pluses and minuses of that. Don't waste time with the ones that aren't going to do anything that you think so, but that's like, they never had a chance if you give up on them before they get on the saddle and start riding. So Harry tended to be that way. He was really good for the good students and not so wonderful for the students that were weak. But most everybody, you have a couple of students that are indifferent. They aren't working. They don't really care about it, and they're cooked. And they don't get any attention at all.
So when you see some of these projects, were there common elements across several projects that he would use? Were there using...
This is every one of these things I'm showing you in that time and before. It was that block is yellow Ocala block, and those beams are wooden box beams that Harry designed, and wood frame, some wood. It's the same language, flat roof, that structural system. He used a 40-inch, he called it a module, or grid. Excuse me. This house is 2s, 4s, and 12s. Everything is either 2, 4, or 12 feet. Grid. I don't so much make it a module in 3 dimensions. Harry liked his 40-inch. I think Rudolph used a 40-inch grid. And it's very close to being a meter, which he thought was something universal about it. but it suited the residential work and the block work very nicely.
But how did you choose without air conditioner the stuff? I mean, the cool of inside. How was the
Air conditioning?
Yeah. In this design, how did you?
What techniques did he use for cooling without? Air
I'm sure they were just plain old air conditioning units and ducts that a contractor designed. Harry didn't use, for his houses, didn't use many engineers. Most of the time he didn't use a structural engineer. He did it himself, or he let the, which is fairly common. That wasn't. He did get himself in trouble once or twice with his own structural stuff.
Harry chose the clients, or I mean.
Would clients? Do you know if clients would reach out to Harry? Was he well known enough, or he wasn't really being published too often in periodicals and journals of the time?
He never, in the time that I was with him, he never entered a competition. He never did any of that, or sought publish, send his work off to the Florida architect. Here, you want to look at this? Compared to other people that, like Dean Rowe here in Tampa, everything that guy did from kindergarten on was published and repolished and sent to 25 people, and everybody just got to see everything that he did. And I was kind of the same way, unless I had marketing people. It's like I'd rather spend the money out on the boat instead of and the time, instead of putting together these expensive packages to send off to award programs or to magazines and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Rudolph was Harry worked for, when he came to the university, he worked for Gene Leedy. And I had since become a good friend of Gene's also. But when Harry was there, Gene had just come from Rudolph's office down there. Oh, and Leedy's story telling you about Rudolph, the starving artist in Sarasota. He had maybe 2 pair of pants, 1 tie, and 1 coat. And the coat and tie hung on the back of his door in his office. And he only put it on when clients came.
This is Rudolph or Leedy?
This is Leedy talking about Rudolph.
About Rudolph, okay.
While he's down there doing it. And he said everything that Rudolph did was drawn and redrawn and sent off to everybody, to all the big magazines, and he would take half a year's of his salary and get Ezra Strolla and some world-famous guy to come down and shoot this little tiny building he had and do these wonderful photography, and then he would send that off with his drawings. And he was getting published, and starving to death at the same time because he was feeding photographers. I don't know if he was married with family. He wasn't. He was homosexual. So he may have had a relationship that I don't know about, but I didn't have any children or family to go home and feed. But he was like, everything he did was photographed to the teeth by the highest, the best people in the world that he could find and get there, whether he could afford it or not. And when I think Architectural Record finally decided, one of the magazines finally decided to, they're going to do a big spread and a whole issue on him and his work. They had so much stuff that he had already given them. They all flew down here. And Leedy said they were just appalled. You had to walk up a little narrow stairway to the 2nd floor with a bare light bulb in it to come into his 2 rooms, and he put his coat on, and there were so many photographers and writers and editors there, they couldn't even get in the place, and they were just, no, this is a bad joke. This can't be, what we came down here to do. And so at any rate, the bottom line is Harry didn't do much self-advertising or promotion. And I don't remember, Oh yeah, he did. He photographed one of these houses. We got constructed, and Harry's going to go out and do some photographs of them. You know, carrying the cameras and all this stuff, and he's setting it up. And he gets a saw, and there's a bunch of oak trees, and he saws down a limb off a tree, and he says, "Here, Ray, to stand here and hold this limb." So it's going to be, the limb that's draped across the front of the house, and so and I'm holding it while he's shooting it to make it look cozier. And I'm telling him, "This is cheating, Harry. This is cheating." He says, "No, it's not. It's just a photo."
Oh wow.
Oh. Anyhow, here I'll plan. Here's the same rendering technique. This is my first house.
Oh, okay.
This is a tiny little house in Tampa. It was probably done in '64. Yeah, right after I came down here.
Your design
It had two great trees in a rear yard that's 50 by 100, little tiny lot, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath.
Was this your first project that you designed and built to completion, like in your professional career after Harry? Yeah.
There was another little project when I came down here. They handled me nicely. It was perfect for me. They gave me a little 6-classroom addition to a church school and said, "Design this." Got it all designed and pretty pictures of it. Said, "Okay, do the working drawings." I learned a lot working for McLean, Renew, McIntosh, Bernardo, technically, that I didn't know and didn't have any experience with. I'd only worked for Harry. And everything was aesthetic decisions. And when I look at some of those drawings that I made of Harry's buildings, construction drawings, I cringe. I mean, you can sit in your drafting board and make 2 corners come together perfectly. But out in the field, if one of them is wood, it's twisting, warping, bending, and somebody out there with a high school education is cutting it and measuring it and trying to bolt it. And there's got to be some forgiveness that you don't need to have in the studio that in reality you do. At any rate, that was just exposed concrete block and plywood roofs, a little box of 3 bedrooms and a bath, and a little living pavilion that opened up to the north side, and 2 great big trees that were there.
Did you use regional material?
Pardon?
Did you use regional material, construction material? Regional.
Like how Ocala block was more of a North Florida kind of building material. Is there
Regional.
Anything? Regional, yeah.
Okay, regional.
Local to
I
the
was hearing a
Tampa
V. My Croatian father was all-American man. I never heard him speak Croatian, except when his brother was here or somebody like that. But on the day he died, he could not pronounce a W. It was a V. No, it was the other way around. He couldn't say V. Victor would be Victor.
Okay.
And on the bridge of his ship, it would tell his officer, very, very well. Not very well. Very well. Anyhow. Yeah, and concrete block, we lovingly call it native stone. It's the cheapest dirt. Everything's built out of it. Everybody knows how to use it. And Harry would upgrade it with the Ocala, the yellow stuff, which was right down the road. What I did was take the native stone garden, everything down below is concrete block, and try to get them to treat it like it was marble, it's finished work. People are making measurements and cuts, they're writing on the walls or standing on it, putting their muddy foot on it, and say, no, that's a finished wall. That's just concrete block. It's going to get covered up. No, it's not. It's not even going to get painted. So don't stain it. Don't spill a Coca-Cola on it.
Yes.
It's going to have a transparent finish. And the grief that we went through, the number of exotic cleanings it was done to get it to turn out as well as it did, I should have just gone and had a special run made of white block. Mm-hmm. And everybody would know from the get-go that it's a finished product, and they would treat it accordingly for all the other people that are working on it and around it the rest of the time. That it turned out nice. I'm happy with it. And the masons understood it when we had a meeting and talked to them and said, you're doing finished work and et cetera. So it's going to have, the joinery and everything else, and you got to keep it clean. If they slop mud on it and scoop it off, they've actually filled all the texture. Yeah. So no matter what you do, it's got a smear in that shows up even that's painted. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. In Florida, they have, I saw in the 1950s houses, Florida room as a special space. Florida room. It's different from the living room.
Yes.
And something is modern, something is regional. They combine together. Some architects. In your project, in your design, you mix everything. Vernacular architecture and modern architecture get together. You combine each other, or how your style. After Merritt or you mentioned about in this house. Also, you care the climate and you care the water here.
Florida room. That's an interesting concept. It's a whole room that was about not sweating to death in a house that didn't have air conditioning.
Yes.
It was the screen porch.
Yes.
That you could get out of the hot house. The negative thing about block, concrete block, is that it's a heavy mass. And in this climate, we want to build things lightweight. The little aluminum foil you get by some pre-made thing in the grocery store, and you stick it in the oven, and you take that, whatever was in it, out. In a minute, that little foil pan, you can handle it. It'll lost the heat like that. Do that same thing in a frying pan, you sear your hands off for an hour because so much heat is embodied in the steel and the lightweight. So what we want to do, we have hot days and hot nights. It's not like the desert where you have cold nights and hot days, and you want the sun to warm up those big thick walls so that when the sun goes down and it gets cold, you have those warm walls keeping you warm inside. But in Florida, you just be cooking yourself. So you don't, block is a negative for climate. And the way I'm using it here, the block downstairs is not around this building. We have a very lightweight wooden box sitting up on top. When the day's sun shuts off, it sheds the heat very quickly. So we're not, if it was block, that heat would have been stored in the wall. When the sun goes down, it gets cooler outside, the wall's now feeding heat into the building. So heavy stuff is requires more refrigeration and more time to get rid of. But it is economical. Florida, I sidetracked myself. There were no more Florida rooms after air conditioning. Front porches. Air conditioning and television killed the front porch, the Florida room, and most of the backyard activity that was out on the back porch and the patios. People stayed inside. You could take your radio out on the porch in the evening and where it was cooler, chat with your neighbors and see people going by, and you could hear the radio from the through the open windows in the house or take out a small one. But by the 50s and the 60s, everything was air conditioned and the world went different.
Yes.
What else you got?
I was going to say, now that you're kind of showing us some pictures of your work, what would you say throughout your career are some of your key pieces of work that you're most proud of throughout your career? Or what were some that were most challenging? We talked about the challenges of working with a team of people and all the levels of engineers and codes and everything that you have to go through.
The challenging ones aren't the architecture or the problem. It's more often than not the client or the regulatory system that says you must do this way, you must do that way, or that you got a client that can't make a decision or won't make a decision or changes their mind, and that you get sideways with. The problems, I mean, there's hospitals and churches are difficult. I've done a lot of public work, and which is really nice in one way and restraining in another way. The big public, a school board, the Board of Regents, they're building all the time, so they have books on here's what we do, here's how you do it, and that's sort of limiting. On the other hand, nobody in that school board, including the school board architect, wants to take the risk of telling you what to do design-wise. They want you to have that. If it turns out to be a disaster, they can point their finger at you. I can't say, I just did what they told me. And so the bureaucrats like to stay away from it, and that's freedom. That makes it easier for you to take it where you want to go. And they relatively rarely interfere with your artistic vision or your concept, as long as it's functional, it works, it's on budget, and it's on time. After that, you can make it as sweet as you can. You go to somebody's church, and everybody wants to see every step, and they are. There's more time massaging and handling and explaining, and besides, they all have a real job, and they're on this church committee, and they want to meet at night. So you're with them in the evenings, and they're a little more. So it's not about the church, or the school, or the house, or the office building. It's more about the clients that I have had. It's a built thing. Wonderful. It's a challenge. Let's do it. Some are, not some, I've done one hospital and a couple major hospital additions. And after I did my first hospital, I came to understand why there aren't many really nifty looking hospitals. They are, now we're talking about people's lives, and how many feet from that nursing station to the switch that's going to save you or kill you, or when this stuff goes on, and there is just so much restraint that just getting all the functional things done is, and you feel like you've done something, and say, yeah, but we hardly ever got to the architecture. They are incredibly difficult, and that's why they're done by firms mostly that do nothing but hospitals. And the more difficult thing is, you're going to do a big new hospital. Everybody's got a hospital consultant whose life is he knows all the equipment. And that's this year when we're designing it. And you've allowed for this, and the electrical engineer's got his power to this unit that is a certain size and a certain weight that we've allowed by the structural engineer. The plumber's got the gas lines to it. And 3 years later, when it comes time to buy that, it's not like that anymore. It's completely different. And everybody's rearranging everything. So the technology moves a lot faster than construction does. And you're always doing high-tech stuff like hospitals, kitchens, commercial kitchens. By the time, if you're doing like a kitchen in a high school, that's a big deal, a lot of money and a lot of equipment and stainless steel. But the 300,000 square feet high school takes from the day we designed that kitchen to the day they're ready to install the stuff. It's 3-4 years later, and half of the equipment isn't made anymore, or it's something else. This is a high school that I did in South Fork, Martin County. That here again, I'm going to do a high school. And we've got a piece of land, 80 acres. We only need maybe 40. That was mostly swamp, no utilities, no water, no sewer, no road, no nothing. And there was a nice high wooded piece down that lower right-hand corner, and a stream through it. And while we were down there meeting with them, we basically, and we're only going to build part of it now, the rest of it would be built in other years. And Jimmy and I were on our way back, and from Martin County, and we drove through, not Brooksville, some little Florida standard town. And it's about 7 o'clock in the evening. And we were talking about the center. These folks had come to Tampa and saw a high school I did here that was like a shopping mall, a giant mall, and all the various wings, art, science, everybody plugged into the mall. And the whip stores, Sears Roebucks and Moss Brothers, were now the auditorium and the gymnasium were at the end of the mall. And they wanted one like that. And at any rate, make a long story short, we wound up saying, how to do that. We're going to bite this thing into a center that everybody comes in and out of, that it's more like a village. And we went into that little town in the evening, and there's Town Square. And, you know, there's one block that's green, and it's got a statue of some guy on a horse from the Civil War, and 1- and 2-story buildings all around it. And it really felt nice. Didn't have a lot of people in it because it was the end of the day. And it was like, this feels good. Size-wise, scale, the sheltered edges where people shopped and walked around the edges were open views across the plaza. And it was a combination of closeness and openness and centering, and the scale just fell. And the police finally found these two crazy guys in suits measuring the block, measuring the neighborhood. So we got the dimensions of it down and came back and drew up the town square, which you can sort of see that little red line in the middle around here. That was the block of the square. These are the little streets that went through, and that was the town square. So we developed our structure where everybody was either going towards the square or out to the parking lot. And when you went from class to class, you went into the square, moved around the edges like the street. So that was the concept of the. Oh, here it is.
What's the name of this school? Do you know remember the name of the school?
South Fork High School.
South Fork High School.
In Martin County. Yeah, okay, that's the dimensions. That's about 250 to the center line of the streets. And this is the covered walk. On your left is the square. That's looking the other way at nighttime. That's a corridor down the middle. That's from the outside. And I guess that's all of them. It's one of the end pieces.
Did you take these pictures?
No. What's his name? The photographer from Tampa. George Cutt. Yes. Remember, I couldn't remember his name the other day?
It's like, oh yeah, that guy.
A Tampa photographer, architectural photographer, spent a day down there taking them. Yeah, I guess that's all I've got of it. And that is steel, a concrete slab on the ground, steel studs, stucco on the outside, plaster on the inside, and heavily insulated. A lot of insulation, lightweight, doesn't weigh anything. Sun goes down, that building is cool in less than an hour.
What time did you draw? What time?
What year?
What year?
70s, late 70s. Oh, I know what. I'll show you USF here in St. Petersburg. I did a university campus.
Was this when your firm merged with the larger firm, or I'm trying to figure out a timeline of your various career kind of movements? Because I think we stopped in the 80s coming to UF to teach briefly after the firm.
That was late 80s,
right?
yeah.
And then at some point
I've been on and off, and in fact, not long ago, Johnny Rignon, McLean, Rignon, McIntosh, and Bernardo, the guys that hired me from Harry, brought me down here. He's 90-something, and I brought him out here, and we spent a day together showing he wanted to see the house. And it's the builders are his family. It's his nephew that built it. They built my second house, and they built this one. And Johnny and I were talking about it because I went to work for them, became a partner, and then left and started my own practice, built that up as Rados Partnership, and then merged it back with him. And I didn't want my name on the door, so it wound up being called Rignon and Partners at the end. And then I wound up being the CEO of that, and then ran away and did some more teaching, and then started my own practice again, Rick Rados Architect, in the early 90s, and got tired of being one person. I picked up work, and I was doing work for other architects. I like joint ventures. I would be their designer. And then Frank McLean, an old friend, we got a school board architect over here, but they didn't give work if you didn't have an office here. So I came over here and rented a room, and I got a lot of school work. And I got tired of trying to build, again, doing nothing but little jobs, and you need a big outfit to be considered for big work, okay, who you are. So I got together with Rowe. They were Rowe, Holmes, Hammer, Russell at the time, but Rowe and Holmes had separate offices. They had parted and just kept the name and pretended they were still one firm with two offices. So I joined Rowe and became Rowe, Rados, Hammer, Russell for a few years. And some of this work that one of them was going to show you is that. And then after a couple, 3 years of that, I left and became Rick Rados Architect again. and went up to Pasco County, opened an office there, did a couple high school up there, but the traveling was just a bit much, so I came back here and then finally retired. And I got divorced in like 98. And I didn't retire till about 2004. I mean, quit practicing.
Right.
So then I just said, okay, that's it. And I had adopted a grandson who was ADHD and cognitively disabled. So I was Mr. Mom also. I was raising an 8-year-old, trying to run an office.
I imagine.
So I said, I think I'll hang it up and paint more. Oh, come on. This is Bayboro Harbor, downtown St. Pete. And USF was going to, the city gave them some land, and they're going to build a new campus over here. And the little dark buildings, and this was a joint venture. This was the Rados Partnership and McLean and Alfonso, 3 firms. We were the design partner. Nelson Pointer and owned like the St. Petersburg Times, that whole organization. They still exist, even though the paper barely does. They wanted real bad to have a campus here, so they got the politicians together, and we're going to donate the land, basically the yellowish area, and they even went off and hired some Boston firm to do a master plan about what it would look like and what have you, in order to get them to commit to coming here. Well, they finally did commit. The Board of Regents, in those days, the Board of Regents owned the universities. Department of General Services owned the universities. The Board of Regents took care of teaching. The buildings weren't theirs. They are now. Each university runs their own show and is owned by the Board of Regents. Anyhow, they hated the master plan they had, and they're interviewing local architects. And of course, the local people wanted the Boston boys because that's who they worked with, and were leaning heavily on them. And the folks that had the power hated the master plan, said it's not workable, it's just a bunch of pretty pictures, and so how do we get around this political problem? So in fact, I think this is part of our presentation, and said, the fundamental, here we do, well, if we do this, it's going to look almost like what they thought they had in mind, and you can defend it as a nod to them, and it's characterizing your new campus as having a waterside park on the water. The buildings are like the fence that faces the water, and it's surrounded by parking. And we're going to have a water concourse that's a covered way. What campus has, can you go from building to building undercover? Think about the other high school that I did that had the courtyard in the middle. This has got a harbor in the middle. And we're just wrapping it around it, and everybody's circulating on both levels around it. In the upper right, there's an airport. And we are right under the clear air zone, so it has to be low. We're on the water, it's floodplain, so we're raising our skirts and ducking. And you'll see later, the buildings turn out to be nice, long, low, lineal things. And then the arrows are like, well, we don't want to stop the community, so there needs to be a lot of entryways between the water side and the community and the parking, and those would be, we characterize those as gateways to get in and out of it. can't find my mouse. Anybody see? Oh, there
Bottom
it
right
is.
hand.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. The yellow here is the aviation. The little dark corner up above, that's where it doesn't flood. And those big black lines are giant concrete underground rivers that we have to step over and around, and they belong to the city to drain it. So it was a lot of stuff, and in the end, it looked like this, well, this is really small. This long, low streak of buildings that was organized with one big, powerful roof, and then some carving out negatively and a few add-ons and form. And it was concrete clad coquina shell. We had precast concrete out of instead of limestone, we used coquina shell and then sandblasted it. So it has a nice light tan look to it.
Was the coquina shell easily available as a building material? I see it mostly in St. Augustine, so I'm not sure about the...
There's a lot of coquina shell that's available that's salt water, and it doesn't. And they have to spend a lot of money washing the salt out of it because the Portland cement and the concrete doesn't like it. But they do have coquina shell that grows in fresh water, and that's most of the stuff that's used in buildings.
Interesting.
So I don't know. It's from here in Florida, but it's freshwater coquina. And that's a shot of the library. That's a rendering of it. It's not my drawing. Oh, and there was a young woman studying for her art degree at Eckerd College that went down there and did this photograph. She's sitting next to me. That's when she was married. She went back to school, got her BFA when she was, mid-30s. And then she had went down and photographed this building and got all the grid, the lines were located properly. I found it in her stuff. Yeah, there's our conceptual master plan. Well, I should have started at the other end. There's the explanation. Anyhow, and then, well, let me back up. Then the city, all that stuff on the left, they built the Dali Museum, and then they gave it away to other people, not to the university. So they just took half of their waterfront away and used it for themselves and said, we're going to give you more land up here, after they were already invested in building. But just off to the left up on top, I just changed the channel here. Okay, don't touch it. That project was here, and that was in the early 80s maybe, and about 10 years later, I got to come back and in a different form. That was Rick Rados, that was a Rados partnership and joint venture, and then it was Roe Rados Hammer Russell that got to do the Nelson Poynter Memorial Library right next to my old 10-year-old project, which that was kind of fun also. The criticism of this building is it's on the waterfront. Where's the windows?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's too solid. It should have been more open. This was after the big oil shortage, energy stuff. The building is owned by the state of Florida, Department of General Services, and they had developed a new computer program that was about energy efficiency. And you had to do your design, work on it for a year or however long, run it through their computers, and see whether you pass or fail on energy consumption. And they had budgets for who you were and what usage you were. And their guidelines were 15%. Back then, glass was glass, and most of the heat load is radiant gain, sun shining through it. And insulation value is also very poor, next to nothing. Nowadays, it's much more sophisticated. This glass up here is 3 layers of glass and a layer of gas. That's probably as good as the wall, almost. But the sun never shines on it either because it's properly shaded. So I was scared to death. And we got a whole budget, and this is the first time I'd ever done that. It's their computer, and our engineers said, well, why can't we use we could be tracking it. No, we have to use ours. And they just adopted it for the whole state. So it was like, okay. And the ground floor is actually almost all glass, but that's all public functions. Meeting rooms, lounges, lecture halls, cafeterias, all the classrooms are up on the upper level, and they're all virtually windowless. And the little slots you're seeing, those are windows in the faculty offices that are wrapped around it. So 10 years later, 15 years later, much more sophisticated, I can open it up. But I got to look, it wants to be part of the family, not completely different. Nelson Pointer.
I see on these past 2 projects with your kind of the initial slide that says like the concept, is starting with the concept an important first step for you in your design?
No. The first step is investigate existing conditions.
Explore
somebody gives you a problem, so you got to dig into all the surrounds, the climate, the location, the traffic, the this, the that, the regulatory environment, blah, blah, blah. Everything that's going to have an influence and play. Then, inevitably, you can make a problem statement that's a lot richer, broader, and more inclusive than just, and you know what the problem really is, not just what they said they want to have. Most clients come and say, I want this here. So I got a here, I got a place, and I got a function. But after that, they don't know much care. Then that I have done a bunch of homework, I got a real feel for the place, for everything that's going on, and I can restate the problem, form some goals and objectives. Now it's, when we're done, what should it do? And I've often talked about to the students about framing goals and objectives is, let's pretend you're going to have a child. I want you to write me an outline of pretty much what your son, what kind of man your son's going to be when he grows up. Tell me, what's the important things? Is he handsome or smart? Is he, tall or short? Blah, 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 blah. All the things you could think of, come up with what you'd like to have. And it's not a person yet, it's a set of ideas. Now you say, how do we, out of all this stuff, what's the connections to get to that place that we hope to be? And that's where the concept comes in. And then you conceptualize it and say, now we got a big idea that I always get confused. What about the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning? One starts with the many small pieces and puts together larger things until you get to an overriding idea. And the other one starts with an overriding issue and breaks it down into the small pieces. Well, design is really back and forth. You start with all the little data down here, and now you build it all up into problem statements and goals and objectives, concept. I got a place to take this that's going to address these things. And then you go work your way back down in architectural terms to address those issues. I forgot where I was going. Anyhow, this is the water side, and it's all glass and louvers. And this is the street side. This is the old stuff with all the coquina shell, and I used a little bit of that language in coquina shell over here, so it looked like it belonged. But from the water side, this peeled off and it opened up entirely. Yeah, on the right is the old building, and on the left is the new library that locks into it and creates another gateway down to the water. Okay, this isn't about grids. One of the things of architecture is order, and an agent of order, a method. Order can be a color, paint everything white. No matter what you've done, you're Richard Meyer, right? You can't be too wrong. It's not about form or structure or blah, blah, blah. There's just one thing. And grids tend to do the same thing. And here I used a 2x2 grid for planning purposes. That became a 30-foot structural grid. The building articulated itself on tens. 3 tens is 20. And the 5 twos are 10. And it's about book storage, libraries are. So there's your standard 5-foot module of rows of books that 2 of them become 10, which break back down to the 2. And the 10's the articulation grid, and in the other way, they're 3 foot wide, and they need aisles. And there's a way to weave that through the structural grid. So the ceiling and the lights and the structure and the other stuff, once I've got a set of numbers, this is before I did anything, not before, but early into it, I got fields of 30 by 30 that I could do anything with. So when they needed an office here or books there, or if it's a reader space, it's different. But and the direction of the lighting also has to do with the direction of the rows. You can't have them coinciding because they want to move them around. They have to be perpendicular to each other to do it. That's a little area of the bridge, of the gateway between them. The entry. Some of the influences from outside and inside that shaped the structure. They had a public art commission. This is a mezzanine level that you come into on the inside that has a grand stair at the back. And they hired an artist to do some conceptual art pieces to hang in it, which clogged it up a bit. Anyhow. But I think, if anything else, you can see it's sets of influences and ideas that kind of come together. I forget Johansson. Remember that guy? He said, I don't design anything. I merely preside at the occurrence of these things becoming what they want to be. There's a little bit of that's true, but not really. Oh, I can flip them that way. Okay. You got anything else? You know, we haven't had, it's late for lunch.
I know. You're very appreciative.
I saw your library. You have Le Corbusier and then European architecture, but what about Frank Lloyd Wright? You like?
There's a little Frank Lloyd Wright up there. No, I tell you what, I was a real zealot. I thought Frank Lloyd Wright was upside down and backwards when I was in school. Here he is telling everybody to go to the suburbs, and we're all going to have our 1-acre lots, and America's moving to the cities. Our cities are growing. We're not moving to the suburbs. Oh, buildings are organic. They should look like natural. I said, no, trees grow. Buildings are built. We don't build trees or mountains. They happen. So it's completely different processes, and blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of talk. Meanwhile, Mies van der Rohe is all about order and universal space. And we don't customize anything, etc. It's a whole different school of thought, and I was of the, Mies was my number one guy early up. And one summer, 3 of us pooled our money, got in, I don't remember whose car it was, one of our cars, and we took off and did the eastern seaboard and Midwest all the way up through Chicago, all the way up to Taliesin north, and looked at, and one of the guys that went, he was a Frank Lloyd Wright guy. We had to see everything that was Wright's on the way, and we had to see everything that Mies did when we were in Manhattan, in Chicago. That was, wow. When I came back from the trip, it was like Frank Lloyd Wright. It's a lot better than Mies van der Rohe. It is, and it's not about the talk, about the philosophy. It's just about the nature of the stuff that's built and the way that it belongs and the way that people use it. Frank Lloyd Wright, we stopped at IIT. We got another year or 2 to go in school. And IIT is Mies's school. He designed the building, the whole campus, and was teaching there. I don't think he was a dean, but he was, and they did it. And school was out, and like summer school was starting, so there were some students around, and you know, we just were shabbily dressed like students are. We walked in and started chatting up some of the students, asking, what are you doing? And it's like, well, you know, and it was like, we don't design buildings, we design details. You have to know how this steel pit works in and fits with that glass member and the proper expression of it. And that's what Mies did. He had a perfect corner, and he made 4 of them, and that was his building. And Universal Space was, we don't do cutties and Victorian fussy stuff. The chapel was the same building as the boiler house for the whole campus. It really was the same building. In the middle of it, there was glass walls and a giant boiler that was heating the university. 2 blocks over was the same building. It had a big stone marble altar in the middle of it, and a few chairs. It was, no. Now, the buildings were elegant. They were lovely proportions, immaculately detailed, and flat. Occasionally they were inspirational. Frank Lloyd Wright would have a stone wall, a piece of glass, a hunk of wood, and it would all come together in some, he never even thought about what that corner was going to be like, and it's a bunch of caulking and glue, and it's a mess. But the building's rich and warm and light and has spatial changes, and even a little tiny house, they were just lovely. And the people that were, you know, you have, here's 3 raggedy guys knocking on, college boys knocking on your door. We're Florida architecture students. Can we come see your house? 99% of the time, it was like, come on in. And they would serve us cookies, tell us stories and about Frank and when he was there. And they loved those places, even though they were decrepit, falling down. And you could see, you know, where the rotten boards had fallen off. You could see the giant steel beam up in there. That's not a wooden building, that's a steel building. The wood is decoration. Frank didn't care. It wasn't about expression. It was more about not expression of materials and structure. It was expression of an idea about nature and buildings and people. That was much, much richer. It was better. But Le Corbusier and Kahn were the real big dogs that I probably influenced me much more than anybody else. Yeah, that's my art books, my architecture books. Fiction, and down below is reference. And
Nice. Would you like to publish some of them, your works?
do what?
Your works, your projects, because we cannot find your projects in any article. Makes sense?
Have you published any of your works, or
A bunch. It's got mostly when it's won awards.
awards?
I got a bunch of magazines back there and a couple of books it's been published in. Some of it has.
Do you keep a personal archive of your works through the years? I mean, you have some
Yeah, that's why.
on the computer, but do you keep like the physical documents still?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I say, oh, yeah. I've got photographs of most of it. I've even got one book of work I did in school, of some school projects. I think.
School projects. It's good.
And we do appreciate your time. We know it's past lunch. I think we're wrapping up. This is wonderful, though. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Nice seeing all this.
Yeah, school works. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh wow. It's amazing.
This is a little beach house,
Fourth year student.
1961, that I did as a student project. I tell you what, that's probably a Harry project.
Probably.
He had a beach house at Crescent Beach.
Did.
And he built it with a doctor.
Enneking. Dr. Enneking.
Maybe.
Enneking.
Okay.
I've been through.
So, of course, you give a beach house project to your students, right? So you get to think about it and see what more, and it's something you're interested in working on. Yeah, I did a little. There's a better plan than that. Excuse me. Little entry here, area down a few steps to a dining and kitchen, down a few steps to a living room, and a couple open bedrooms, so it could be just wide open or some folding doors, close it off. And it just kind of sat, again, two parts. There's a ground piece that's concrete and stucco on the ground, and a big roof hovering, and you're sort of living in between.
It's fantastic that you've kept all of this.
Great archive.
That's another, that's Florence Knoll. It was a house for her. Gorgeous site in Key Biscayne. Three sides water. It was a little tiny peninsula. And they did a lot of entertaining, and that's basically what it was about, was a living area up on top that, in fact, was just a roof for the grand hall that they would do entertaining in. Floor plans.
Same.
Okay. Remember I told you the housing
yes.
project that I did for Merritt that wound up being a big square donut, all the same?
About how big was this model? Sorry, like probably about this big.
Yeah, maybe about that size. Anyhow, yeah, I wanted that, but the lower portion to weave in and out. So we would have new little courtyards outside that fit into the center one, and then that big top could kind of bind it all together. It's more of the same.
You said you would put color. Your personal preference was to use
This
color.
is
Yeah.
this is a beach club that Harry was on the jury, and he gave me such a load about. He says, Rados, those little tiny columns. He says, you got this big planes and things sliding around, and then you got these little tiny columns. He says, it's like Pinocchio's got a stick on his nose. And he said, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the gall to paint it red. You knew you had problems there. So that's my Pinocchio project. And that was some car dealer's something. I think that's about all I have from my student days.
This is the same?
No, that's my second house. I don't know if I showed you.
The picture.
Ah, this house.
Yeah, you can see it that way maybe. That's another little 50 by 100. It's right next door to my first house. See that over there? That's the first one. If there's a plan. Yeah, this is the corner. This is the second house. My first house was right there. And that was a little planter, and the courtyard with the two big trees in it was right next door to it. I sold it to one of my employees.
Someone you trusted.
Michael Archer. He was married, and his father-in-law lived about 2 blocks away from me. And he said, you know, I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Living next door to my boss and 2 blocks from my father-in-law.
Beautiful. The table.
See that table?
Yeah, I like it so much.
Seen that before.
When I'm working for Harry, I got out of school, I was married, had a child, a little guy that just got born. And our dining room table was a card table, you know, with the fold-em-up legs. And we were actually not living in a one-room studio where we could now afford a little duplex with 2 bedrooms. And I'm at a cabinet maker shop in Gainesville, and Harry's looking at some cabinets that are being built for one of his houses. And I'm over on the side looking at a pile of lumber. It's just beautiful. Black American walnut, and I'm just handling these pieces, and the guy, the cabinet maker, comes over and says, "You like that?" He says, "Guys, this is beautiful stuff." He says, "Yeah, it is." He says, "It's scrap. We don't need it. You want it? You like it? You can have it." Thank you, God.
Yes.
So I got boards about 1 by 8, about this long. And now what am I going to do with them? What am I going to do with them? Well, I need a table. So I took each board and sawed it diagonally. So now I have 2 triangles. So I'm going to make a round table. And it was like King Arthur, right? None of this head of the table stuff. And I saw the folly of it all when all these little tiny points come to one place. and said, it's going to be a mess. It's just going to be a glob of caulking. It's going to be like Frank Lloyd Wright did it. You can't build it. And the lesson is, I'd have never found the answer by drawing. I'm sitting on the floor with these boards, shuffling them, arranging them, playing around, and realize if I take each one and shove it just past the other one, they form a little circle. Well, got it. Design's done. Anyhow, I built that in 1963 with hand tools.
Amazing.
Handsaw and a wood rasp. I made it round. And when I finally got it built, I drew up the base steel, and I took it to a metal shop in Gainesville, asked him to build that for me. And they said, okay, give it a week or two. And went back a couple weeks later, gave me a call, said, you can pick up your table base. And I don't know, I had $25 or $30 or something in my pocket, and it was 50. It was like, oh my God. He says, well, I don't have $50. How about if I give you, $25 now, and I'll come back in a couple of weeks with the other 25 and pick it up. And they were like, okay. So we finally bought it out of hock. I had no idea it was going to cost that much. That table weighs about 800 pounds. It's 3/4 inch of solid walnut, 3/4 inch of plywood, and 1.5 inches of southern pine framing under it on a steel base. Anyhow, it really needs a refinishing. My first house was gray block, reddish redwood, wood overhead, mahogany furniture. It was all warm, and I was a little Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, little orange here and yellow colors, and everything was warm. When I went to build the second house, it was when I realized I want lightweight, I want light colors. The light dies on dark things. The light in here, because of the white, moves around nicely. It's always bright. We hardly ever turn any lights on. So it's lightweight, shiny, bright, and white is the mantra now. And I got this dark, almost black, well, it's called black American walnut, and it's real dark. So I took it outside and bleached it and bleached it and bleached it to lighten it up. So that's been bleached several times. It used to be black walnut. But I made that when I was working for Harry.
Wow. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, there's some more shots.
I think one of my last questions for you, trying to be respectful of time, is with the work of Harry and your other professors and your earlier work, what are your thoughts on some of this becoming historically important, worthy of historic preservation? How do you feel about that?
The historic preservation, I quarrel with most of it because we're preserving crap. It's not preserving good stuff. There's no selectivity about it. All it has to be is old, and then it's valued. And we don't value old people just because they get old. We may respect them because they're elderly, but that doesn't make them brighter contributors or anything positive about it. So I've never worried much about it because most of it, the criteria is to be old. That's all. And and we should preserve in the past, and I do my own work as I learn from it and look back, and some of those things that I did a long time ago are the seeds of something nice, and the rest are like, which shows I've grown. Maybe in what direction, I don't know. I've moved on to something else. Historic preservation is touchy for that reason for me, is because we spend a lot of energy and time honoring things that weren't honorable in the day they were built. City Hall in Tampa, was I telling you the story just the other day? was run down. It was, I don't know, it was designed in 1910 or 1930 or something, and it's just a big box with a little tower on it. It's kind of a wedding cake. And I don't know why we ever even went after it. Now, it was like the city's entertaining, needs architects to think about the new city hall. Well, they had pretty much already decided by the time we got into it. And we applied. What's in Gainesville, the architectural professor that was his expertise was historic preservation.
Blair Reeves?
Blair. I couldn't remember Blair. So anyhow, and they said, well, there is preservation. It's going to be an issue, blah, blah, blah. And I called Blair and asked him if he'd serve as our preservation consultant and join our team. And he said, yep. So we signed up Blair and a bunch of other people, and we made the final cut, and they interviewed like 5 firms. Well, by this time, it was like I had now gone to the building. The air conditioning was just a horror story. The electrical was a mess. It was impossible to do anything with it. It had an open stairwell in the middle. It was a fire hazard. And the only reason it wasn't shut down a long time ago is it had historic status, and you're allowed to burn up in a historic building. You're forgiven a lot of code requirements that you couldn't build a new one like that. And the sloppy sprinkler system that was trying to offset that. The walls were cracking and leaking. There was mold and mildew in it, and said, you can buy a new building for half the price it would take to fix this, and it doesn't function. Look at your bookkeeping department. They're on 3 different floors, and they're running up and down stairs. I really think, so anyhow, we went in, and we knew we were cooked. And basically said, we challenged the whole premise of your project. And what you don't need an architect to spend millions more on this old building. What you need is somebody to look at your options. Seems like you've made a premature decision, that you value this, and it's an ordinary building. And the day it was built, and the day it is today, and it's run down, and to spend all that money doing this, seems like you could better spend the money on a new city hall or on some hybrid thing to save pieces of it or what have you, but not straight out, and that's what we propose. And you could just see the looks, the historic preservation people had their heads under the table. We were dead. And one of the engineers that was with me, when we walked out of the interview, he said, Rados, you really have, I won't say the words, a lot of guts to do that when you know that's not what they were looking for. Well, maybe they needed to hear it, because we weren't going to do the other one. The preservation. I mean, our hearts weren't in it, and it was like, let's challenge the whole idea of preservation of this thing. There are things that are valuable and need to be saved and cuddled into the future. But to take an old piece of junk that was a piece of junk the day it was built and revere it just because it's old, I don't know. What was the question?
No, you answered it perfectly. It just gives a lot to think about for what's coming of age, and like you said, value. Is it valuable or is it just old? So it's definitely the things that we're thinking about.
Exactly.
I think.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to add? Well, this has been fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Yeah.